I transcribed audio files for $40 an hour. I quit after file 89. I need to start with the boring part, because the boring part is important. I was unemployed. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that has a good story attached to it. I was just unemployed in the regular, humiliating mid-30s way where you send out 40 applications and hear back from 2, and both of them ghost you after the second interview. I had a background in audio production. I'd spent 7 years at a mid-sized podcast company that got acqui-hired by a tech firm that didn't actually want the podcast division, just the software, and that was that. Severance ran out in March. By May, I was doing freelance transcription work on one of those gig platforms where you make $11 an hour and your rating drops if you take longer than 20 minutes on a 5-minute file. I was doing that when the email came in. No subject line, just an email address, a string of letters and numbers at a domain I didn't recognize, and 2 sentences. Your audio production background has come to our attention. We have a transcription position available at $40 per hour, remote, flexible hours. Reply if interested. I want to be honest. My first thought was scam. My second thought was $40 an hour. My third thought was that I had $340 in my checking account and rent was due in 11 days. I replied. The response came back within 4 minutes. Not a form letter, not a link to an application portal. A name. They told me to call them Harrow. Just Harrow. And a brief explanation. They ran an independent archival firm specializing in audio documentation. They needed someone with production experience, someone who could work with degraded audio, unclear recordings, difficult acoustic environments. The files were sensitive. Confidentiality was required. They would send a contract. The pay was $40 an hour, minimum 20 hours a week, paid weekly. I signed the contract that night without reading it carefully enough. I know that. I know that now in a way I didn't know it then. The work itself was simple. They sent me audio files, always WAV format, always through an encrypted file transfer portal they set up on my laptop during a remote installation session. The files came with a reference number and nothing else. No context, no explanation of what I was listening to. No indication of where the recording had been made or by whom. My job was to transcribe everything I heard, every word, every sound, every ambient noise, with timestamps accurate to the 10th of a second. I had good equipment. 7 years in podcast production meant I had a proper audio interface, studio headphones, editing software. I set up the first file at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee and a blank document, and I hit play. The file was 43 minutes long. It was mostly silence. Not complete silence. There was a room tone underneath it, that specific low hum that any space makes when it's full of air and emptiness. Occasionally, there were small sounds. A creak of what might have been a floorboard, something that sounded like wind against glass. Around the 20-minute mark, what might have been footsteps, very distant, maybe in an adjacent space. At 37 minutes and 12 seconds, a door, not slamming, the soft, careful click of a door being pulled shut by someone who didn't want to make noise. Then 43 minutes of nothing. I transcribed it all. Every creak, every ambient shift, every timestamp. Sent it in. Got a confirmation email with that week's payment attached. $320 for 8 hours of work, which was more than I'd made the entire previous week on the gig platform. I did not ask what the recording was of. I told myself it was legal work. Surveillance audio, maybe.
Insurance documentation. The kind of thing that has legitimate uses, but that clients don't want to explain because explaining it creates liability. I had worked in media long enough to know that sometimes the less you know, the better the working relationship. Files 2 through 11 were similar. Empty rooms mostly, ambient sound. Occasional noises I couldn't identify with certainty. Wrote them down as best I could. File 7 had voices in it, but distant and badly degraded.
Two people having a conversation I could only catch fragments of. A number. A date that I noted, but that didn't mean anything to me. The word already. Said with emphasis, like it was the important word in the sentence. I transcribed what I could and marked the rest as unintelligible. Harrow sent a note after file 7. Your attention to sonic detail is exceptional. Please continue. That was the first time I felt good about the job in a way that wasn't just about the money.
I've always been proud of my ears. It's the one thing I was genuinely good at in production. Catching things other people missed. Identifying sounds other editors would mark as background noise. My old boss used to say, I heard in high definition. I thought it was a compliment. I understand now that it's why they found me. File 23 is where things started to change, though I didn't understand it that way at the time. File 23 was different from the others acoustically. Cleaner recording for one. Better microphone, less room noise. And it had someone in it. Not voices in the background, not distant footsteps. A person, present in the room, close to the microphone. A woman. She wasn't speaking. She was breathing. Just breathing. Slow and deliberate. The kind of breathing you do when you're trying to stay quiet. When you're concentrating very hard on making yourself small. 40 minutes of her breathing. Occasionally a shift of weight, fabric against something. At one point, maybe 28 minutes in, a small sound that I classified as a suppressed cough, the kind where you press your hand over your mouth and push it back down before it fully escapes. Then, at minute 39, something changed. The breathing caught. A single sharp inhale, involuntary. The kind you can't control because something has just frightened you badly enough that your body acts before your mind does. And then the breathing stopped being slow and deliberate and became fast and shallow and wrong. Then the file ended. I transcribed it. I sent it in. I made a cup of tea, and I stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking at the street, and I told myself it was a medical recording, a sleep study, a controlled psychological experiment. The involuntary inhale was a dream startle, maybe. Common, documented, completely explainable. I almost convinced myself. Files 24 through 30 were back to empty rooms, and I was relieved in a way I didn't examine too closely. Then file 31 came in, and it had the woman again. Different room, I could tell by the acoustic profile, harder surfaces, smaller space, a bathroom maybe, or a kitchen. And she wasn't just breathing this time. She was talking, quietly, almost whispering, but clearly. To herself, I thought at first. The way people narrate under their breath when they're doing something stressful. But the rhythm was wrong for self-narration. There were pauses. She was answering something. Except there was nothing else on the recording. No other voice. Just hers. And the pauses where another voice should have been. I know, she said. Pause. I know, I already said I would. Longer pause. That's not... No, that isn't what I agreed to. A very long silence. How much longer? It wasn't a question.
The inflection was flat. The kind of flat that means you already know the answer isn't going to be good, and you've decided to receive it without flinching. I sat with my headphones on and my fingers above the keyboard, and I didn't type anything for a long time. I was listening to the silence that came after. It lasted 6 minutes and 42 seconds. Then the file ended. I transcribed it. I told myself she was on the phone and the other side of the call wasn't captured. Bluetooth maybe, with the audio routed away from the recording device. Completely plausible, completely normal. I sent it in and I went to bed and I didn't sleep well. I need to tell you about what happened with my ears. It started around file 40. I'd been on the job about 6 weeks by then, and it had become routine in the way that any repetitive work becomes routine. You stop thinking about it as a whole task and just move through it step by step. File comes in, headphones on, transcription open, play. The detail work that had felt exhausting in week 1 had become automatic. My brain had adjusted to the register, learned how to pull signal from noise without effort. The problem was, it didn't stop when I took the headphones off. It started small. I'd finish a session and go make dinner, and I'd hear something at the edge of audibility, a specific creak or a tone, or what I thought was breathing, and I'd stop and tilt my head and try to locate it, and there'd be nothing there. I wrote it off as audio fatigue. Happens to sound engineers all the time. You train your ears to hear things, and then they hear things whether you want them to or not. But it kept happening. And it started being specific. Not random phantom sounds, sounds from the files. The floor creak from file 4. The distant footsteps from file 8. That suppressed cough from file 23. I heard the cough in my shower one morning, clear as anything. The specific sound of someone pressing their hand over their mouth and pushing the cough back down, coming from my own bathroom while I was in it, alone. I turned off the shower and I stood very still and I listened for 30 seconds, and there was nothing. The apartment was silent except for the water draining. I got dressed and I sat at my kitchen table and I drank my coffee, and I thought very carefully about whether to send an email to Harrow asking what exactly I was transcribing. I thought about the $40 an hour. I thought about my bank account, which now had real money in it for the first time in 8 months. I thought about the 2 words in that email he'd sent after file 7. Exceptional. Continue. I opened a new file and put my headphones on. I understand that this is the part where you're thinking, why didn't you stop? And the honest answer is that the thing making me not stop was the same thing that makes people stay in situations they should leave. Not stupidity, not naivety, but the very human capacity to explain away what you're seeing in favor of what you need to be true. I needed the money to be real, so everything else had to be explainable. I was very good at finding explanations. File 67 came in on a Thursday morning in July. I remember the specific morning, the light through my kitchen window, the half-eaten bowl of cereal I'd pushed to the edge of the desk, the way the room smelled like the first, almost cool morning after a long, humid stretch. I remember it with the kind of detail I usually only have for important things. I remember it because it was the morning everything stopped being something I could explain. The file was 90 minutes long, which was unusual. Most of them ran under an hour.
I noted the length, adjusted my document, hit play. The first 20 minutes were a room. Medium-sized space, some reverberation, maybe an office or a hotel room. Nothing else. Then a door opened, and someone came in and sat down, and the recording caught the specific sounds of someone arranging themselves in a chair, the shift of weight, the placement of something on a surface, papers maybe. And then they started talking.
I'm going to type out what I transcribed because I need you to understand exactly what I heard. Okay, I'm going to try to do this. I'm not sure how to start. I've never done something like this before. A short exhale. I guess I start with how I got here. I was unemployed. It's not a dramatic story. I had a background in audio, production, editing, that kind of thing. The company I worked for got bought out, and they didn't want the audio division, just the software. And that was it. I was on a gig transcription platform, making almost nothing, when the email came in. No subject line, just a string of letters at a domain I didn't recognize, and 2 sentences offering me $40 an hour. My hands had stopped moving. And I was sitting completely still with my headphones on and the audio playing, and the voice in my ears was describing my life. Not similar to my life, the platform I'd been using, the email format,
The hourly rate, the audio background. I sat there and I listened to her. The voice was a woman's, low and careful. The same careful quality as someone who is trying to be precise, because precision matters. Describe the first files she'd received. Empty rooms, ambient sound, the creak at file 4, file 23 with the breathing, the woman in file 31 answering questions that had no audio source. She was describing my files. I hit pause. I sat in my kitchen with my heart going at a pace that I could feel in my hands, and I thought about all the explanations. A coincidence. Harrow had multiple transcriptionists, and this was one of them, and we'd happened to be assigned similar material. An internal review process where they recorded their own workers to assess quality. A test of some kind. A very elaborate, very expensive test. I hit play. I started hearing the sounds when I wasn't working, she said. The phantom audio. I told myself it was ear fatigue. I kept walking. Around file 60, I hit pause again. File 60. I was on file 67. My hands were shaking. Not dramatically, a fine tremor, the kind that happens when your nervous system has received information it doesn't know what to do with and is expressing its confusion through your extremities. I thought, if I keep playing this, I'm going to hear her describe something that hasn't happened to me yet. I thought that very clearly, that exact thought. And I noticed that I had already accepted the logic of it, that I hadn't pushed back on the premise. I sat there for a while, long enough that my coffee went cold. Then I hit play. Around file 60, she said, I heard something in one of the files that I need to be careful about how I describe this because it sounds wrong when I say it out loud. I heard myself in the file. not a sound that was similar to something I'd make or a coincidence of vocal quality.
I heard my own voice in an audio recording that was sent to me to transcribe. The file was dated 8 days before I received it. I was speaking, in the recording, about hearing sounds in my apartment that came from the files. I was describing what was happening to me. I was describing it in the past tense, which means when that recording was made, it had already happened. Which means she stopped. The recording held silence for 4 seconds.
Which means someone recorded that conversation before I had it. Which means they knew what was going to happen to me before it happened to me. Which means none of this, another stop, longer. None of this started with the email. I did not finish file 67 that day. I closed my laptop and I went for a walk. And I walked for 2 hours through the neighborhood, seeing nothing. Because everything I was looking at with my eyes was happening behind them instead. The specific chain of logic that the woman's voice had laid out, following it forward, following it backward, looking for where it broke down. It didn't break down. I kept looking for the place where it stopped making sense, and I couldn't find it. That night I opened the transfer portal.
Not to receive files. I'd been using it that way for 2 months, and it had never occurred to me to look at anything other than the incoming folder. But there were other folders. I don't know why I'd never thought to look. I think the answer is the same answer to all the other "why didn't you" questions. Because I didn't want to find anything. Because finding something meant the explanations stopped working. There was a folder called Active. There was a folder called Archived.
There was a folder called Intake. I opened Intake. It was a list of names, 40, maybe 50 of them, each with a date and a file count attached. I scrolled through without processing them, just scanning for patterns until I reached the most recent entries at the bottom. My name was there. My actual full name. File count 67. The date next to my name was the date of the email. The date Hero had first contacted me. Above my name, 4 entries up, was another name I didn't recognize.
File count 89. A date 6 months before mine. And next to that name, in a column I hadn't noticed, a status marker. The status next to most names said Active or Archived. The status next to the name 4 rows above mine said Complete. I scrolled back through the list. Most of the archived entries said Archived. About 8 of them said Complete. The dates on the complete entries were all different. No pattern I could see in the timing. But every complete entry had a final file count, and the counts ranged from 70 to 112. Nobody in the complete column had filed more than 112 transcriptions. I was on file 67. I went to the archived folder. I searched the name 4 rows above mine, the one with the complete status and 89 files. There were 89 audio files under that name, and there was 1 text file, a transcription document, hers. All 89 files, fully transcribed, time-stamped,
in her handwriting.
You can tell someone's transcription style the way you can tell someone's handwriting, the specific choices you make about notation and description.
I opened the document and I searched for a name, and I found in the header of the document a brief note she'd added that wasn't part of any transcription. 7 lines. She'd written it in the notation style, but the content wasn't notation. She wrote, "If anyone reads this, the files are not recordings of other people."
I understand that now. Files 45 through 67 are recordings of me. Files 68 through 81 are recordings of things that happened after I stopped walking. I don't know how they have recordings of things that hadn't happened yet when I received them. File 89 is... I can't finish transcribing file 89. I've tried 4 times. I'm going to try once more, and then I'm going to disappear this document somewhere. They won't find it before they send me file 90, and it's too late. The document ended there.
I searched for file 90 in a folder. There wasn't one. I didn't sleep that night. I want to be clear that I mean that literally. I lay in my bed and I watched the ceiling, and my brain worked through the architecture of it, because understanding the mechanism is the only thing that has ever made me feel less afraid of something. If I could understand what was happening, I could find the edge of it. I could find where I stood in relation to it. I could find what I needed to do. By morning, I thought I had the shape of it, or something close. The audio files are not recordings of other places and other people. They are recordings of the transcriptionist, of me now, of her before, of whoever came before her. The empty rooms in the early files, those are your spaces, your apartment, your rooms, recorded at moments you weren't there or weren't paying attention. The breathing in file 23, that was her, breathing in her own home, being recorded without her knowledge. The file, then given to someone else to transcribe first as a test or a calibration, and eventually given to her to transcribe herself, and by then she was deep enough that she couldn't look at it straight. The woman in file 31 answering questions with no audio source. She was answering the questions they would eventually ask her, the interrogation or the debrief, or whatever word you want to use for what they do at the end.
She was hearing the questions somehow and answering them in her apartment alone, and it was being recorded. Future audio, played into someone's perception in the present. The response captured and archived for someone else to transcribe later. A loop. The whole thing is a loop. They find people with exceptional auditory perception. They begin recording them. They send them recordings of themselves to transcribe, starting from the distant past and working forward.
Calibrating the transcriptionist's ear, conditioning them to hear things others can't, pushing their perception further and further along some spectrum I don't have proper language for. And at the end of the process, when the transcriptionist's hearing has been refined to whatever degree they need, they capture it. Whatever has been developed, whatever the ear has become. File 89. The last transcription the previous archivist started but couldn't finish.
I think file 89 is the CAPTCHA itself. I think that's the recording they need you to transcribe. Because transcribing it, hearing it with your fully calibrated extraordinary perception, and processing it and translating it into language, that's the transfer. That's what they're actually collecting. Not the transcriptions, not the documents. Your hearing, in its final form, walked through a door it can never come back from.
And file 90 is sent to the next archivist to begin the process again. I don't know what they use it for. I don't know if it's a technology I don't have a framework for, or something older than technology, or something I would need entirely different words to describe. I know what I have seen in the portal. I know what the previous archivist wrote in her 7 lines. I know that every complete entry in that intake list has a last file.
And I know that after the last file, there is no complete archivist anywhere who filed a report or sent an email or interacted with the portal ever again. They disappear. Not into a void, I think, into the work, into the next set of files. I think they become what I've been transcribing. I'm at file 82. I know. I know what that sounds like, given everything I just told you. But I need you to understand what happens when you try to stop. The day after I found the portal folder, I didn't open a file. I sat at my laptop and I worked on my resume and I applied for 3 jobs and I sent Hero an email saying I needed to take a leave of absence for personal reasons. Hero responded in 4 minutes, the way Hero always responds in 4 minutes. And the response said, "Of course, please let us know when you are ready to resume. Files will be held." Normal, professional, no pressure. That night I heard the files. Not phantom sounds, not audio fatigue, not the ambient noise my trained ears were pulling from the air around me. I heard them the way you hear something through headphones, directly, close, inside my skull. File 37. The industrial sound I'd never been able to identify. File 51. The voices speaking a language I didn't recognize. File 67. My own voice. The woman I'd thought was someone else, describing my life, but understanding now whose voice it actually was, hearing the quality of it differently, hearing it in the future tense, hearing it as something that hadn't happened yet. I opened my laptop, and I opened the new file, and I put my headphones on. I understand that this is the part where you lose sympathy for me. I understand that. But the sound inside my skull, without the headphones on, is worse than the sound through the headphones. And the only thing that makes the inside my skull sound stop is doing the work. It's conditioning. I know it's conditioning. I can name the mechanism and still be subject to it. And I think that's maybe the most disturbing thing I've discovered in this whole situation. That understanding the trap doesn't get you out of the trap. I'm at file 82. 7 files left before 89. I've been trying to figure out if there's a way to stop before then that doesn't involve disappearing. I've been going back through the portal, reading the previous archivist's transcriptions more carefully, looking for anything she left that was meant to function as a map. She was careful. Careful in a way that suggests she knew someone might eventually read her notes. Knew she couldn't be obvious. Buried things in notation choices and timestamp irregularities that you'd only catch if you had very good ears and a long time to listen. I found something in file 73 of her set, a timestamp she marked as 002307.4 that the actual audio puts at 002306.9. The discrepancy is 0.05 of a second, small enough to be a typo. But it's not a typo. I checked every timestamp in her document and every other one is accurate to the tenth of a second, which is standard. She only mismarked one. One timestamp, off by exactly the right amount to be a choice rather than an error, in a file that lasts until 002308.0.
She was pointing at that exact moment. I listened to 002307.4 through my cleanest setup. Under the main audio,
in a frequency range that you'd need studio headphones and production-level ears to catch, there is something. Not words. A tone. A sustained tone at a specific frequency that I now know because I've heard it before. I've heard it once before. The day I was sitting in my kitchen, and the room stopped being my kitchen. The tone is what the files do to you, and she captured it.
She caught the moment of her own capture, and she hid it in the timestamp discrepancy, because she knew whoever came after her would be calibrated well enough by file 73 to hear it. And I think, I'm not certain, I haven't tested it yet, that if I can hear the tone clearly enough, if I can transcribe it precisely enough, I can understand the frequency. And if I can understand the frequency, I can reverse it, play it backward.
Use the same door to come back out that they used to pull me in. It's a theory. It might be completely wrong. It might be the most wrong theory I've ever had. But file 89 is coming, and I have 7 files left, and I can still choose what I do with them. I'm writing this down because she wrote hers down. Because the person before her probably did too, somewhere, in whatever way they could.
Because this is how you leave a map for the person who comes after you, in case your theory is wrong, and you disappear like the others. If you got this far, if you're reading this because you found it somewhere, in some file or folder, or tucked into something that shouldn't contain text, then you are probably where I was. You probably have good ears. You probably have a job you don't fully understand, and a bank account that looks better than it did, and a growing collection of sounds you can't unhear. Here's what she told me that she didn't know she was telling me. The timestamp is the door. The frequency is the key. And file 73 is the one you need to hear before you go any further. Stop before file 89. I mean it. Whatever they tell you, whatever it sounds like inside your head when you stop,
Whatever the silence threatens, stop before 89. I let you know if my theory works. If you don't hear from me again, it didn't.